The first thing Evan Marsh noticed that morning was not the sound of birds or wind, but the low, grinding rumble of machinery. When he stepped onto his porch, coffee still steaming in his hand, he froze. On 3 sides of his property, HOA contractors were carving a trench into the earth. It was deep and ugly, like a moat around a castle they intended to trap. Karen Lattimore stood with her arms crossed, sunglasses glinting in the morning light, wearing that smug political smile she had perfected over years of neighborhood control. "Evan," she called out, her voice dripping with false warmth, "don't worry. This is community improvement work. Completely legal, completely safe." Evan did not answer. He stood perfectly still, watching the trench deepen with every pass of the machinery. His coffee went cold in his hand. He knew instantly that this was not landscaping. This was intimidation dressed in construction vests and bureaucratic language. But what Karen did not know, what she could never have anticipated, was that the trees behind Evan housed his secret advantage. Blackbird N9 cameras positioned weeks ago when the first warnings of HOA aggression appeared were silently recording everything. Later that morning, Evan drove toward town. His tires dropped into a fresh section of the trench with a sickening jolt, and dust exploded around his vehicle. 2 HOA board members stepped onto the road as if they were law enforcement, blocking his path with crossed arms and rehearsed authority. "You need HOA approval to move construction equipment," one of them sneered. "I live outside your jurisdiction," Evan replied, keeping his voice calm despite the anger building in his chest. "That's what you think," the other muttered, barely concealing a threat. When Evan finally pushed past them, something shifted inside him. A realization crystallized with painful clarity. Karen was not simply trying to annoy him, she was trying to cut him off. Literally, isolate him from the world beyond his property. That night, as he reviewed the Blackbird footage in the dim glow of his monitor, he discovered something far worse. Bruce Lattimore, Karen's husband, appeared on screen in the darkness, whispering to 2 workers with the urgency of a man committing a crime. "Go deeper. Make sure he can't get a vehicle out by morning." This was no misunderstanding. This was a siege beginning. Evan woke past midnight to a sound no one ever wants to hear near their home. Shovels. Dozens of them, working in rhythm. When he moved to the window and pulled back the curtain, silhouettes lined the boundary of his land, digging in synchronized waves. Some held flashlights clenched in their mouths. Others wore headlamps that bobbed with every thrust of their shovels. All wore the same HOA reflective vests, turning trespassing into something that looked almost official.
Karen's voice echoed across the darkness like a battlefield command. "Dig faster. He needs to learn." Evan grabbed his phone and recorded the screen from his cameras as the timestamps blinked in the corner. Blackbird N9 captured every face, every tool, every illegal movement. He whispered to himself in the darkness of his living room, his voice steady with cold resolve. "I warned you people. You didn't listen." The next morning, Deputy Riley Knox arrived after Evan finally convinced the sheriff's office that something dangerous was happening on his property. Knox walked the perimeter of the trench, kneeling beside its edges, running his fingers along the freshly turned earth. His eyes narrowed with professional concern. "This isn't maintenance," he said quietly, more to himself than to Evan. "This is intentional confinement." Karen appeared within minutes, strutting toward them with the confidence of someone who believed badges bent to her will. "Deputy, this man is being dramatic. The community voted on soil drainage improvements. It's all documented." Knox cut her off without raising his voice, but his tone carried an edge sharp enough to slice the morning air. "Your trench creates a barrier preventing a resident from entering or leaving his property freely. That's unlawful. That's not drainage. That's imprisonment." Karen's eyes hardened behind her composure. "How dare you accuse us of anything improper? We have procedures. We have votes." Knox held up a hand, silencing her. I'll be back tonight, and this trench better not be any deeper." Karen stared at Evan as the deputy walked away. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "We'll see," she said softly, and the words hung in the air like a promise of escalation. That evening, before the sun fully surrendered to the horizon, Evan checked the hidden cameras again. What he saw made him inhale sharply and hold his breath. Bruce Lattimore had returned with heavier equipment: a compact excavator, a generator, floodlights that turned the property line into a construction zone. They were not simply deepening the trench anymore, they were widening it, transforming it into something a person could not cross without a ladder or mechanical assistance. The HOA board watched from lawn chairs arranged along the edge, sipping drinks and chatting as though they were enjoying a neighborhood barbecue rather than participating in criminal harassment. Then Bruce spoke the words that changed everything. His voice carried clearly through the night air, captured perfectly by the Blackbird microphones. "By morning, he won't be able to walk out." Evan paused the video. His hands trembled, but not with fear. A cold, controlled anger settled into his bones, the kind of anger that sharpens rather than blinds. "All right, you want a war, you got one." Evan worked through the night with methodical precision. He placed motion alarms along the northern tree line. He rotated his cameras to cover every angle of the trench edges. He installed ground sensors he had not used since his days surveying remote construction sites. And just before dawn painted the sky gray, he deployed his final piece: a long-range floodlight rig hidden among the branches and wired to activate automatically when triggered. At exactly 4:13 a.m., the sensors detected movement. 3 silhouettes appeared on the camera feeds, approaching his property with tools in hand. Blackbird N9 switched to night vision clarity, capturing every detail with military precision. Evan hit the switch. A blinding wall of light erupted across the property line, illuminating every face like a police spotlight during a midnight raid. The trespassers froze in place, caught, exposed, and visibly terrified. Evans stepped outside holding a camcorder, recording them openly now, his presence a statement of defiance. "I told you," he said calmly, his voice carrying across the lit battlefield. "My cameras see everything." Karen was not there to witness the humiliation, but Evan knew she would hear about it by morning, and he knew she would return furious. By sunrise, the entire HOA was buzzing with panic and outrage. The 3 board members caught in Evan's floodlights were humiliated, terrified that Deputy Knox would receive the footage that proved their guilt. Karen Lattimore stormed down the road toward Evan's driveway like a commander marching into hostile territory. "You will remove those lights," she shouted, her voice cracking with barely controlled fury. "Remove those cameras, stop spying on my people." Evan stood his ground without flinching. "They dug onto my land, at night, with tools. That's not spying, that's documenting crimes." Karen's composure fractured further. "You don't understand what neighborhood standards mean. You don't understand community." "Oh, I understand," Evan replied evenly. "That's exactly why I moved outside the HOA." Karen leaned closer, and her voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "Not for long." Those words were not a threat. They were a declaration of war. Evan realized in that moment that Karen was no longer trying to intimidate him, she was trying to erase him entirely. That night, a knock came at Evan's back door, soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. Megan Hart, the HOA treasurer, stood in the shadows, glancing nervously toward the tree line as though afraid of being seen. "Evan, I shouldn't be here, but you need to know something."
Her eyes darted constantly, checking for witnesses. Karen believes you're conducting illegal surveillance on HOA activities. She's calling an emergency vote to declare your land a community hazard. If that passes, they'll petition for county intervention. Evan felt his stomach tighten. That's completely illegal. I know, Megan said, her voice barely audible. But she's manipulating the board. Bruce has been scanning your property boundaries with surveying equipment. I think they're building a case to claim you're encroaching on community land. Evan's jaw tightened with anger he struggled to contain. And one more thing, Megan added, leaning closer. Karen believes your cameras are illegal surveillance devices. She's planning to have them seized by the authorities. The picture became terrifyingly clear. Karen was not improvising. She was executing a calculated plan designed to strip Evan of his property, his privacy, and his freedom. Deputy Knox returned the following afternoon, driving slowly along the expanded trench with an expression darker than before. He pulled Evan aside, away from potential eavesdroppers. Someone filed a formal complaint. They're claiming you installed military-grade surveillance equipment on community land. 3 guesses who submitted it. Evan retrieved his tablet and showed Knox the footage of the nighttime trench diggers, the timestamps clearly visible, the faces clearly identifiable. Knox watched in silence, his expression growing grimmer with each passing second. Finally, he exhaled a long, heavy breath. This is beyond HOA nonsense. What I'm seeing here borders on false imprisonment. And if they're altering property lines under cover of darkness, that's criminal activity. He turned and stared at the trench, measuring its depth with experienced eyes. Evan, you're sitting on a powder keg, and Karen Lattimore is holding a lit match.
Before climbing back into his patrol vehicle, Knox offered a final warning that Evan could not shake from his mind. Be ready. They're not finished with you yet. Just past 1:30 a.m., the motion alarms triggered again. Evan rushed to his monitors, and his stomach dropped at what he saw. This was not a few rogue board members sneaking onto his property. This was a full-scale HOA operation. 20 people moved across the screen. More floodlights than before, more digging equipment, bags of cement mix stacked in neat rows. And Bruce Lattimore stood at the center, giving orders like a foreman commanding a construction crew. Make the trench deeper on the driveway side. He needs to feel completely trapped, Bruce barked. Evan zoomed in on something disturbing in Bruce's truck bed. A stack of official-looking boundary markers sat ready for placement. Bruce was preparing to physically relocate Evan's property line under the cover of night. "They're actually doing it," Evan whispered, disbelief mixing with anger. "They've completely lost their minds!" Then he noticed one more detail that confirmed his worst fears. The HOA workers were hammering small wooden stakes into the ground, attaching freshly printed signs. One sign came into focus on his screen. HOA restricted property, no trespassing. They were not just harassing him anymore. They were attempting to erase his land entirely from legal existence. Evan did not panic. He executed the defensive plan he had constructed during daylight hours, waiting for exactly this moment. At 2:07 a.m., the trench team stepped into the northern perimeter, triggering Sensor Cluster 3. Blackbird synchronization mode activated instantly. 12 cameras flashed simultaneously, their infrared tracking locking onto every moving figure. Floodlights blasted downward in a coordinated sweep that turned night into blinding day. Audio alarms boomed from hidden speakers positioned throughout the property. "You are trespassing on private property! Leave immediately!" The HOA crew screamed in terror, scattered in every direction, stumbled into their own trench. One man fell face first into a mud pit and came up sputtering. Another slipped on an abandoned shovel and crashed to the ground. Bruce cursed loudly above the chaos. "He's using military gear! Find the controls! Shut it all off!" But they had no idea where the speakers or cameras were hidden. They stumbled blindly through the artificial daylight, crashing into each other, tripping over equipment. Evan watched from inside his home, completely calm, completely in control. He had transformed his property into a fortress they could not predict, could not disable, and could not defeat. The next morning, Karen herself came marching up Evan's driveway. No sunglasses this time, no pretense of politeness. Her eyes carried a wildness that Evan had not seen before, the look of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "You think you can humiliate us?" she screamed, her voice cracking with uncontrolled fury. She stepped closer, her hands shaking at her sides. "You assaulted my people with blinding lights. You terrified the entire community. Children heard the alarms. Families were woken from their sleep."
Evan remained perfectly still. Without a word, he lifted his tablet and played a video clip. The screen showed Bruce ordering workers to dig deeper, to trap Evan, to ensure he could not escape his own property by morning. Karen's face drained of color for a moment. Then the blood rushed back, turning her cheeks crimson with rage. "That footage is illegal," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You recorded people without their consent. We will press charges. We will have you arrested." Evan met her gaze without wavering. "You dug a prison around my home. I caught you doing it. Every face, every word, every shovel in the ground." For the first time since this conflict began, Karen had no comeback. No procedural argument, no threat wrapped in bureaucratic language. She simply stood there trembling, her authority dissolving in the morning light. Then she spoke quietly, and her voice carried something more dangerous than anger. "You don't understand the kind of influence I have in this county. You don't understand what I can do to people who cross me." She turned and walked away slowly, deliberately, like someone planning something catastrophic with every step. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute over property lines and drainage ditches. This was a war with an opponent who had become unhinged. And Evan knew with absolute certainty that the worst was still coming. Evan did not call his younger brother Oliver. He had not wanted to involve family in what he still hoped might resolve itself through legal channels. But Oliver showed up anyway, having heard rumors through mutual friends about the situation escalating beyond reason. Oliver stood at the edge of the trench, his jaw clenched tight, his hands planted firmly on his hips as he surveyed the damage. His background in military logistics gave him an immediate understanding of what he was seeing. "Bro, this is a military-grade choke point. Someone designed this to cut off access completely." Evan nodded grimly. The HOA did it. Karen Lattimore and her husband Bruce. Oliver blinked in disbelief. "A homeowners association dug a containment trench around your property? Are you serious?" But when Evan brought him inside and showed him the footage, the nighttime operations, the boundary markers being relocated, Bruce barking orders like a commanding officer, Oliver went completely silent. He watched every clip without interrupting, his expression growing harder with each passing minute. Finally, he turned to face his brother. "You're under siege. A literal siege, and these people have no idea who they decided to target." Oliver's expression hardened into something Evan recognized from their childhood, the look Oliver wore when someone threatened family. "We hit back. Oliver said firmly, legally, strategically, and hard enough that they never recover. For the first time since the trench appeared, Evan did not feel alone. Karen, growing desperate as her control slipped away, called an emergency HOA meeting at the community park pavilion. Residents gathered under string lights that swayed in the evening breeze, their faces a mixture of confusion, concern, and growing suspicion.
Karen's voice carried through the night air with theatrical urgency. Evan Marsh is a danger to our community. He installed military-grade surveillance equipment. He attacked innocent residents with blinding lights and deafening alarms. He is a threat to everything we have built here. But the crowd did not respond with the unified outrage she expected. Cracks had already formed in her foundation of loyalty. One woman near the back shouted her objection, "Karen, you told us that trench was for drainage improvements, but my neighbor saw Bruce digging at 2 in the morning. That's not drainage work." Another voice joined the dissent. "My son fell into that trench walking home from a friend's house. He sprained his ankle. Nobody warned us it would be that deep." The murmuring grew louder. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen slammed a folder onto the table. Photographs of Evan's cameras circled aggressively in red marker. "We will seize those devices. We will reclaim our community perimeter. And if necessary, we will involve county authorities to remove this threat from our midst." But Megan Hart rose quietly from her seat in the back row. Her voice was soft, but carried clearly in the sudden silence. "Karen, you didn't tell us you were trying to move Evan's property lines. You didn't mention that Bruce was placing fake boundary markers on land that doesn't belong to the HOA." Karen froze mid-gesture, her eyes locked onto Megan with barely concealed fury. "How do you know about that?" she hissed. The entire assembly stared at their president, and for the first time they saw not a community leader, but a woman caught in lies she could not explain away. The fracture in Karen's authority became visible to everyone present. She saw it happening, watched her power crumbling in real time, and panic flickered behind her eyes. At 2:46 a.m. that night, the motion sensors triggered again, but this time only one figure appeared on Evan's monitors. Bruce Lattimore moved alone through the darkness. No board members accompanying him, no reflective vests providing the illusion of legitimacy. He carried a crowbar in one hand and a bolt cutter in the other. He moved with deliberate purpose, heading straight toward one of the hidden camera hubs that Evan had positioned in the tree line. Evan watched from his monitor, whispering to himself, "Bruce, what are you doing?" Bruce reached the camera mount and swung the crowbar with full force. The camera shook violently on its mounting bracket, but did not break. Blackbird N9 units were built to military specifications, designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault. Bruce grunted with frustration and swung again. The bracket bent slightly, but held firm. On the third swing, Oliver stepped out of the shadows, where he had been waiting. His flashlight beam blasted directly into Bruce's eyes, freezing him mid-motion. "Drop it," Oliver said calmly.
Bruce recoiled, stumbling backward toward the trench he had helped dig. The crowbar slipped from his grip and clattered to the ground. Oliver did not raise a weapon. He did not shout or threaten. He simply stood there, flashlight steady, voice controlled. "You're trespassing on private property at night, carrying tools used for property destruction. That's criminal mischief at minimum. Keep going and you'll see the inside of a jail cell before sunrise." Bruce said nothing. His chest heaved with panicked breathing, and the terror in his eyes confirmed what Evan had suspected. Bruce knew exactly how guilty he was. He knew the cameras had captured everything. He turned and ran into the darkness, leaving his tools behind as evidence. The next day, Evan and Oliver presented Deputy Knox with the complete collection of footage: Bruce's solo trespass, his attempt to destroy surveillance equipment, the HOA's coordinated nighttime trench expansion, the boundary markers being illegally relocated. Knox leaned against his patrol SUV, watching the videos play on Evan's tablet. His expression grew darker with each clip, the lines around his eyes deepening with professional concern. "This isn't an HOA dispute anymore," he said quietly, almost to himself. "What I'm looking at is conspiracy, intentional property damage, unauthorized construction on land they don't own, criminal mischief, and something that looks very close to false imprisonment." He straightened up and met Evan's eyes directly. "I'm forwarding everything to the sheriff and the county attorney, and I'm issuing an immediate cease work order on all construction activities in this entire neighborhood." As Knox prepared to leave, Karen happened to drive past Evan's property. She slowed her vehicle and watched the deputy walking away from Evan's door, watched the professional respect in their body language, watched her carefully constructed narrative collapsing. For the first time, her face showed not anger, but genuine fear. The kind of fear that comes from understanding that consequences are finally arriving. That evening, Evan noticed something strange on his perimeter cameras. Karen's USV was parked at the end of his driveway, engine running, headlights off. She sat motionless behind the wheel for 5 full minutes, simply staring at his house. Finally, she stepped out and approached the edge of the trench. She did not realize that the microphones were picking up every word she spoke. "He can't win," she whispered to the empty night. "Not after everything I've built. Not after all these years of keeping this community in order." Her voice cracked with emotion she could not contain. "He's turning my board against me, destroying my reputation, ruining everything I've worked for." Then her tone shifted. The self-pity hardened into something sharp and unstable. "I'll finish what I started. One final operation, and this time it will be permanent." Evan replayed the audio recording twice, making sure he understood what he was hearing. Oliver leaned over his shoulder, listening to Karen's words echo through the speakers. "She's planning something major," he said grimly, "and she's completely lost touch with reality." This was no longer HOA harassment dressed in procedural language. This was a dangerous woman approaching a breaking point, and whatever she was planning would not be subtle. At 4:05 a.m., the Blackbird cameras captured movement across every sector of Evan's perimeter boundary. A convoy of HOA trucks approached from multiple directions. Bruce drove the lead vehicle, his face set with grim determination. Board members filled the other trucks carrying tools and equipment, but the trucks themselves carried something that Evan's blood run cold. Massive concrete barriers, the kind used for highway construction, sat loaded in the truck beds. Barriers heavy enough to seal a driveway permanently. Megan's voice came through on Evan's phone, terrified and breathless. She had called from her car, hidden somewhere she hoped Karen could not see.
"Evan, listen to me. They're planning to block you in completely before sunrise. Karen told Bruce to finish the perimeter. Those were her exact words. Finish the perimeter." Evan stood at his window, watching the headlights approach like an advancing army. His fists tightened at his sides. Oliver stepped beside him, reading the situation with tactical precision. "They want a war," he said. "So let's show them they picked the wrong target." Blackbird N9 switched to full alert mode, all sensors armed simultaneously, all floodlights primed and ready, all audio warnings loaded and prepared to broadcast. This was no longer harassment or intimidation. This was the HOA's final siege, their desperate attempt to finish what they had started. And Evan was done playing defense. At 4:13 a.m., the HOA trucks rolled deeper onto Evan's boundary, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Bruce jumped from his vehicle and immediately began barking directions like a battlefield commander. "Get those barriers in position! Move faster! We need this done before sunrise!" Karen stood behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, muttering words that the microphones captured with disturbing clarity. "Control the perimeter, control the community, control everything."
Evan watched the operation unfold on his large monitor. The HOA was minutes away from permanently sealing him inside his own property with concrete barriers too heavy to move without industrial equipment. Oliver stood beside him, every muscle tensed, adrenaline surging through his system. "It's time to end this," he said. Evan reached for a single switch on his control panel. Blackbird N9 entered Sentinel mode. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the hidden speakers, building in intensity. Floodlights activated in a synchronized 360-degree sweep, transforming night into blinding artificial daylight. A thunderous pre-recorded warning blasted across the property at maximum volume. "This property is under active recorded surveillance. Step back from the driveway immediately. You are trespassing on private land." The HOA operation collapsed into instant chaos. Workers screamed and scattered in every direction. Half of them stumbled into the trench they had dug, falling over each other in their panic. Two men dropped a concrete barrier directly onto their own feet and howled in pain. One truck lurched forward as its driver lost control and tipped sideways into the ditch. Karen screamed above the pandemonium, trying desperately to maintain order. "Stay where you are! He's bluffing! Those are just lights and speakers!" But the cameras were not bluffing. Every lens was tracking every face, recording every crime in perfect clarity. Evan pressed the second switch on his control panel. Every camera rotated simultaneously and locked onto Karen. 12 red indicator lights pointed directly at her, tracking her movements with mechanical precision. She froze in place, exposed under the floodlights like a criminal caught in a police spotlight. Her authority evaporated. Her commands went unheeded. Her people fled around her, while she stood paralyzed by the realization that she had finally lost control completely. Then the sirens began, multiple vehicles approaching from the main road.
Deputy Knox arrived with 3 patrol SUVs, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. The moment Knox stepped from his vehicle and surveyed the chaos, the trucks, the concrete barriers, the expanded trench, the panicked workers, his expression transformed from professional concern to barely contained fury. He grabbed his radio without hesitation. "Dispatch, I need immediate county backup and code enforcement. We have an illegal encroachment in progress, destruction of private property, and mass criminal trespassing. Multiple subjects on scene." Karen ran toward him, abandoning any pretense of dignity. "Deputy Knox, thank God you're here. Arrest him! Arrest Evan! He's attacking us with military equipment!" Knox did not slow his stride. His voice cut through her protests like a blade. "Karen Lattimore, you are done talking." Bruce tried to step forward, perhaps to support his wife's claims, but Knox pointed at him with unmistakable authority. "Bruce Lattimore, do not move. I have video footage of you attempting to destroy private property at 2 a.m. last night. You are already facing charges." Bruce stepped backward like a frightened child. All his bravado evaporated instantly. Knox turned to address the entire group, his voice carrying across the lit battlefield. "Everyone off this property. Now. Anyone still here in 60 seconds will be arrested for criminal trespass." The remaining HOA members scrambled toward their vehicles in complete disarray, abandoning tools and equipment in their haste to escape. Karen stood alone in the chaos, shaking visibly, whispering to herself, "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." But it was happening. Everything she had built was crumbling around her.
The county sheriff arrived within minutes, followed by the county attorney and code enforcement officers. Evan handed over everything, organized files containing every piece of footage his cameras had captured over the past weeks. The nighttime trench operations with workers clearly identified, the boundary marker tampering with Bruce placing fake stakes, Bruce's solo destruction attempt with crowbar in hand, Karen ordering her people to finish the perimeter, the concrete barrier siege captured from 12 different angles. The sheriff watched the footage in silence, his face reflecting disbelief that an HOA could descend to such extremes. When he finished, he turned to look at Karen, who sat slumped in a folding chair someone had brought from one of the abandoned trucks. "Let me make sure I understand what I'm seeing," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with professional disgust. "You dug a trench around a man's home. You attempted to trap him on his own property. You tampered with legal boundary markers. You tried to seal his driveway with concrete barriers." He shook his head slowly. "That's conspiracy, harassment, criminal trespass, unlawful construction, and something that looks very much like attempted false imprisonment." Karen tried to speak, but no words emerged from her mouth. She simply sat there, face buried in her trembling hands, the weight of consequences finally crushing her. The HOA board members who remained began arguing loudly among themselves. They blamed Bruce. They blamed Karen. They blamed each other. They claimed they were following orders, that they did not understand what they were participating in, that they were victims of manipulation. The unified front that Karen had commanded for years disintegrated into accusations and desperate self-preservation. As officers began escorting HOA members back toward the road, Karen suddenly broke free from the group. She sprinted toward Evan's driveway, her face contorted with fury that had finally overwhelmed her reason. "You ruined me," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You ruined everything I built." She grabbed a wooden stake from the ground and raised it above her head, perhaps intending to smash a camera, perhaps something worse. Her eyes held nothing but blind rage. Oliver stepped between Karen and his brother, his body positioned as a shield. Karen froze, the stake still raised, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. Deputy Knox moved quickly, grabbing her wrist and removing the stake from her grip. "That's enough," he said firmly, but without cruelty. "You're done." Karen's rage deflated as suddenly as it had erupted. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed to her knees in the dirt, trembling uncontrollably, mumbling words that made no sense. "I just wanted order," she repeated like a broken mantra. "Order. That's all, order." But order was the last thing she had created. She had built chaos and called it community. She had constructed tyranny and labeled it standards. And now, everything she had built was burying her. By the end of that day, the legal consequences became official. Karen Lattimore faced criminal charges including multiple counts of trespass, intentional property damage, illegal construction, harassment, coercion, attempting to alter county property records, and endangering public safety. Each charge carried potential jail time.
Bruce Lattimore faced charges for vandalism, trespass, and attempted destruction of surveillance equipment. His cooperation with investigators might reduce his sentence, but his marriage to Karen ensured he would not escape unscathed. The HOA board faced substantial fines, mandatory reconstruction of Evan's damaged property at their expense, and civil liability for the actions they had authorized or permitted. The sheriff personally approached Evan before leaving the scene. "I've been doing this job for 22 years, he said, shaking Evan's hand firmly. "This is one of the worst abuse of power cases I've ever seen from a homeowners association. I'm sorry you had to go through this." Evan simply nodded in acknowledgement. Justice was not satisfying. It never truly was, but it was necessary. County crews arrived the next morning with professional excavators and construction equipment. They filled the trench that had imprisoned Evan for weeks. They removed every concrete barrier. They restored his driveway to its original condition. They surveyed the property and redrew the correct boundary lines, erasing all evidence of Bruce's illegal marker placements. Megan Hart, the treasurer who had risked everything to warn Evan, approached him quietly as the crews worked. "I'm so sorry it went this far," she said, genuine regret in her voice. "I should have spoken up sooner. I should have done more." Evan considered her words carefully before responding. "You tried to stop it when it mattered. You warned me when warning me put you at risk. That took courage." Megan nodded slowly. "Some people don't want peace. They just want control. Karen wanted control, Evan agreed, and she was willing to destroy anything that threatened it. Megan glanced back toward the HOA neighborhood, now leaderless and uncertain. She lost the presidency permanently. The board voted this morning. She's facing criminal charges and civil suits from 3 different homeowners whose property was damaged during her operations. Evan watched the excavators smooth the last section of restored earth. I suppose she dug her own trench in the end. A week later, when the land had healed and the legal processes were well underway, Evan installed one final Blackbird camera. This one was not hidden. He mounted it prominently on a pole near his rebuilt fence, its lens facing the road, its presence unmistakable. It was not there for protection anymore. It was there for closure, a visible reminder of what had happened and what would never be forgotten. Then he posted a sign on his fence, the words clear and simple. Private property, not HOA land. Trespassers will be recorded. Oliver stood beside him, surveying the completed defenses with professional approval. Think any of them will ever dare come back? Evan glanced toward the HOA neighborhood. The houses stood quiet now. No committees gathering for late-night operations, no trucks carrying construction equipment, no board members pretending to be authorities they never possessed. No, Evan said with quiet certainty. They finally learned the truth. Oliver raised an eyebrow. What truth is that? Evan allowed himself a slight smile, the first genuine smile he had worn in months. You don't dig trenches around a man's home when that man can bury you with the evidence. The morning sun broke fully over the horizon, casting warm light across Evan's restored property. Birds sang from the trees where his camera still watched. The wind moved through leaves that had witnessed everything. And Evan Marsh stood on his porch, coffee steaming in his hand, finally at peace on land that was undeniably, legally, permanently his own.